Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. Thank you all for being here. My name is Zahra Amanpour. I have the honor of moderating and speaking at today's event. Before we go any further, I would like to make sure everyone knows this event is being recorded and may be shared on social media or in other channels. I am so excited to be part of this incredible event that is raising awareness and perspective about the most pressing issue of our time and its impact and influence on women, the most pressing issue of all time. I've had the pleasure of being on the board of Women Freedom Forum since 2004. I am also a senior advisor at Jobs for the Future, an organization focused on economic advancement for all. And I am a serial entrepreneur and advocate for small businesses and work primarily with women, minorities, and other marginalized communities. I'm also a mother of two. Women Freedom Forum is a research and educational 501(c)(3) status NGO with a mission to raise public awareness on women's issues, including human rights, empowerment, economic development, and gender equality. We are a volunteer-based organization and a non-political organization. We are independent and not associated with any government. Women Freedom Forum holds consultative status with UN ECOSOC and is an association with the UN Department of Global Communication. Our research focuses on issues in countries where women experience strong social challenges toward their rights. Our long-term vision is to live in a world where there is equality, social justice, and respect for women's rights. Women Freedom Forum's publications and presentations are referenced for inclusion in international reports by UN missions, universities, NGOs, and individuals. We share the issues and speak for those who cannot rightly speak for themselves. We provide platforms to share relevant information. The speakers are expert in their chosen mission. The positions or opinions of speakers and writers may not necessarily be those of Women Freedom Forum. However, we support the independent right of our speakers to share their experiences and express their views. Diverse approaches continue to move us all toward the ultimate goal of human rights and gender equality for women. I am honored to be in the presence of today's speakers, albeit virtual. I will introduce them to you individually as we go through today's program. Thank you all for sharing your time and unique experiences and perspectives with us today. I would also like to take a moment to thank our supporters and board members who couldn't be with us today. We'd like to thank the various UN diplomatic missions for their ongoing support, and to our board members, Paula Corrado, Barbara Forster, David Matisse, who's an international human rights attorney, Professor Donna Hughes, Dr. Judy Pataxil, Dr. Amina Aldin McLeod, and Tamila Kionford, our communications director. Thank you all so much for all that you do to support Women Freedom Forum and work towards a world where there is equality, social justice, and respect for women's rights. As mentioned, today's event will be focused on the impact and implications of climate change on women and the measures that can be taken to address them. A healthy environment provides critical checks and balances on women's human and economic rights. Women Freedom Forum panelists will speak of why comprehensive environmental policies are so necessary for women's positive initiatives and/or will challenge the lack of competence of relevant regulations, legislations, and laws. To begin, and to keep me focused as a moderator for the rest of this event, I would like to share my own talk with you all. I will be speaking about the economic, social, and political implications of climate change on women. I'm an Iranian American with close ties to the Iranian people, so I'm speaking from that perspective. The economic, social, and political implications of climate change on women in Iran. There is no doubt that women bear the brunt of the Iranian regime's brutality and attack on natural resources. Climate change is increasingly an issue that impacts women disproportionately and yields heavy economic, social, and political implications for them. These implications are further exacerbated by the double standard and segregated laws the Iranian regime upholds against women. Anything that brings life to this world, whether it be a river or a woman's body, the Iranian regime is hell-bent on her destruction. Iran is known for its rich natural resources and biodiversity. In recent years, the long-term disastrous and profit-centric policies of the regime have revealed deep and irreversible changes to Iran's environment. 30 of the 31 provinces in the country are experiencing severe drought. This can be seen in the shrinking Caspian Sea, disappearing wetlands, dried up rivers, and retreating forests across the country. Iranians are subject to daily poisoning by the pollutants in the water and air. Villages that once resided next to some of the luscious lands in the world have no direct access to water, and their economies have been destroyed. The Iranian regime has no regard for natural or social stability. Local economies, especially in more rural areas, are often centered around and dependent on the natural resources of a particular region. Women are disproportionately economically impacted by job and opportunity erosion caused by climate change. For example, in the area surrounding Lake Hamoud, what was once the third largest lake in Iran, the economy was built on fishing and crafts. Men were traditionally fishermen, and women created crafts from the reeds in the water. The Iranian regime has rerouted rivers and built dams without any regard for conservation and the people dependent on them. Lake Hamoud is now completely dry and gone. This loss of life destroyed the livelihood of more than 15,000 fishermen and women and has huge long-term implications for the entire region, including farmers and herders who are being hit by constant sandstorms from the dryness and imbalance of the overall climate. The people surrounding Lake Hamoud have now been put in a position of extreme poverty and desperation. Women, who were the ones responsible for food and maintaining the household, are subjected to more severe conditions as they negotiate life and death decisions amongst family members and pull resources from harsher and longer distances. Declining food production has led to increasing food prices. Women often skip what are already meager meals, despite the fact that their physical labor has increased under these conditions. Men often migrate for work, and women are left dealing with this new reality. The mental and physical health of these women are under great distress. In some cases, families from the regions emigrate to the cities for work and new opportunities. Unfortunately, the cities are not better protected from the regime's greed and brutality. Drug use, crime, prostitution, and lawlessness are rampant. Women immigrants are subjected to the worst working conditions and homelessness, and often find themselves in precarious or dangerous situations, resulting in abuse or even death. Women's unemployment in Iran is twice that of men, and they're 3 times the global average. Naturally, the recklessness and apathy of the regime in the regions most impacted by climate change have led to civil unrest and protests. In 2021, hundreds of thousands of Iranians rose to protest the lack of water. What began as cries for water soon became shouts for freedom and justice. The uprisings have become a daily occurrence and are no longer only affiliated with the larger cities. The rural regions have become the dominant force for change. Despite the regime's systematic persecution of women throughout the country, women often rise as leaders in protests as they have nothing to lose and everything to gain. The regime has reacted as it always does with greater cruelty, and stepped up its state-sponsored assault on women. Women are being arrested and executed at higher rates. Circumstances in women's prisons have worsened with overpopulation and unsanitary conditions. In December 2021, 7 women were executed in 1 month, compared to an average of 15 per year in prior years. The Iranian regime executes more women than any other country in the world. It's easy to look at the implications of climate change in a vacuum and not see the way it harms every aspect of society and every person in society. Unfortunately, women are always the ones to bear the deeper consequences of these harmful policies and insatiable greed. The Iranian regime is on its last leg, as evident by the extreme economic and social policy it so venomously implements to maintain its hold on the people of Iran. While the hair on my arms rise every time I hear a woman's voice in the newest coverage of the protests in Iran, my heart bleeds for the pain and suffering they must endure for something as simple as water and their deeper desire for freedom. The war being waged against our earth by those in power is inevitably a war on women, the fabric of our society. Thank you so much for listening. I'd like to now hand it over to our next speaker, Lynn Dykstra. Lynn's career as a professional photographer gives her creative license to capture the heart and soul of national and international events, especially those that speak to the powerful issues of women's rights. Lynn represents Women Freedom Forum for UN issues and civil society outreach. She serves on the Women Freedom Forum Advisory Board in this capacity. Today, she will speak on environmental and socio-economic challenges of rural women farmers in African countries. Who is helping them and how? Thank you so much, Lynn, for being here. Lynn, we can't hear you. You are on mute.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We welcome you. Thank you for joining in. Thank you to NGO CSW66 for the opportunities to speak on this platform. With WFF's mission to bring women's rights issues to the world's attention, I've chosen to speak on what I consider the most egregious attack on human rights, the experience of hunger and starvation. If we do not eat, we can die. It's as simple as that. We have a worldwide humanitarian responsibility to the UN Declaration of Human Rights to assure that people do not die from hunger on our watch. The challenges to eradicate hunger are immense, given the obstacles of conflicts, climate, pandemics, and increased costs cited by the UN World Food Program. Over 700 million humans suffer from hunger and starvation in the world. Considering current world conflicts and their effects on food production, this will only increase. At what level do these obstacles affect women's socioeconomic development and human rights? Basically, at all levels. As an example, I want the rural women farmers who labor on the smallholder farms throughout the African continent to have their story heard by this UN CSW world audience today. I hope my voice accurately shares their immense challenges and highlights the programs that are helping the women move forward toward reliable food security for themselves, their families, and their villages. Women farmers make up more than 60% of the African agricultural working population. The majority smallholder women farmers are a major part of this million-strong workforce. The issue of food insecurity is constantly at their doorstep. These women farmers are not immune from civil or environmental obstacles, nor are they immune to long-standing cultural traditions in their male-dominated villages and communities. They labor to produce enough subsistence food in a growing season so their families don't go hungry in off seasons. The right to have enough food to stave off hunger is a basic human right. The rural women farmers want to own their land, buy more seeds, grow more crops, be paid as much as male farmers for their yields to ensure this basic human right for themselves and for their families. These women are extraordinarily resilient despite the environmental, social, and economic roadblocks in their daily lives. Their contributions are never fully rewarded commensurate to their actions. Physical and mental demands on women farmers are extreme. Their long work days in the fields include heavy physical labor. Add to that childcare, household duties, along with daily fear of gender-based violence. Add on the added stress of failed crops and the fear of hunger. This makes for an exhausting toll. Yet day in and day out, they persevere. Economic inequality of rural women farmers stems from long-standing cultural village traditions and the laws of the land. Women have limited land ownership rights. Inherited land goes to the male heir. Women can be forced to rely on a male relative or friend to front the ownership for a plot of land. If the male purchaser backs out, the land and her crops and her income could be confiscated. And yet there are encouraging high-level talks within African agricultural organizations to work toward making it legal for women to own land. Ethiopia's government is addressing this issue to allow a wife's name to be included on the property deed with her husband. When the local communities in Ethiopia accept this law, it gives women a basic sense of security with measurable increases in production and income, and that supports the growing empowerment of women. If women farmers have excess yields to sell, the market price for them is about 50% less than males sell their yields for. More and more loan programs are available for women farmers to buy seed and fertilizer supplies. Yet buying supplies at a higher price than men farmers and then having to sell their crops at a price less than men farmers sell theirs remains grossly inequitable. Women's cooperatives are slowly coming to the forefront as a counter to the gender inequality and pay issues, particularly with the fair trade crops of coffee and cocoa. Women gain leadership skills and empowerment opportunities. Membership in the cooperatives brings them confidence. They can begin to benefit economically. This makes the basic fear of hunger less of an issue for them and their families. Access to technology is another challenge. Mobile phones are available in many rural agricultural areas, but internet access isn't always there. As internet connections improve, successful online training and development programs for women farmers are expanding throughout the continent. Several NGOs such as UN Women, Women Who Farm Africa, and several others in cooperation with government organizations have on-site training programs in Senegal, in Nigeria, Ghana, Tunisia, Tanzania, Namibia, and in several other sub-Saharan countries. As the women farmers expand their knowledge, they in turn teach others. With more land-based training opportunities, productivity and incomes increase. Positive socio-economic changes are evident. Women's health improves and their families and villages benefit. Hunger subsides. Climate change poses a major threat to hunger alleviation and is a huge impairment to successful crop production. Planting seeds before an expected rainfall is great. If the rain falls, many times it doesn't, and the valuable seeds will die before they even have a chance to grow. Temperatures rise to extreme levels and fields harden up. Women walk miles to access water and carry it back to the fields when nearby rivers are dry. The environmental issues are one of the hardest to control. Crop production experiments to counter climate changes are tested for measurable results on larger yielding farms, not necessarily on the rural women farmers' small plots. These smallholder women farmers are the true backbone of the African agricultural industry. Their labor feeds millions every day. They deserve equity to grow crops, feed their families, sell their excess yields, and help others do the same. Empower women farmers with skills, leadership training, and equal resources to work their land and sell their yields. Teach them new climate smart initiatives to counteract environmental challenges. Pay them equitably. With their expanding knowledge and skills and perseverance and a voice at the table, we know that millions of rural women farmers will indeed be in a much stronger position to feed the world, one family, one village at a time, and reach past that very stressful point of fearing or experiencing hunger. Just listen to what Stop Hunger, the NGO that supports 54 women empowerment programs in 31 countries, says. Quote, "It is proven that by empowering women, we can substantially eradicate hunger in our communities," end quote. Hear their stories, like Malawi activist Anita Chitaya, whose food security and nutrition activism on behalf of the rural women farmers is featured in the award-winning film, The Ants and the Grasshopper. And Dr. Esther Lupafia of Malawi, co-founder of Soils, Food, and Healthy Communities. Her expertise in agroecology and nutrition is applied to the issue of community food security. Or Maureen Mukitha, of Kenya, who founded her organization with a goal to end hunger and malnutrition. One of her programs teaches women farmers to successfully grow indigenous crops in vertical gardens on arid land through sack farming. New ways, new learning, crops grow, yields are sold, families eat, hunger is abated. Empower their strengths, advocate alongside them on the issues that give rural women farmers the greatest access to food equity and security for themselves and their families. In this one important way, we honor our humanitarian commitment to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights to assure that no one goes hungry on our watch. The smallholder rural women farmers in Africa and worldwide deserve nothing less. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. If we do not eat, we die. I think that kind of says it all. Such inspiring stories of resilience and change. Hopefully these types of conversations that we're having today can bring some more awareness to the plight of women farmers in Africa, further their empowerment, and share their incredible stories with the world. And hopefully bring them closer to their most basic human rights and economic rights. Thank you so much for your talk. Next, we are joined with a video recording by Dr. Solmaz Abou Ali. She was not able to be with us here today, but very much wanted to be part of this conversation. So she sent a video for us. Dr. Abou Ali is a professor, author, and practitioner working at the intersection of sport, diplomacy, and conflict resolution. In this capacity, she designs and implements sport-based programs for a diverse group of actors, such as government, non-governmental organizations, and philanthropic figures seeking to address social and political conflict through soft power methods. Dr. Abou Ali is also a world champion and 14-time US national champion in traditional karate. Her video will speak to the significance of women's leadership in climate crisis. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Solmaz Abouali. I'm a professor of conflict resolution, a published author, and consultant. I'm also a 14-time US national champion and world champion in traditional karate, representing the United States nationally and globally. First, I'd like to thank Women Freedom Forum for providing me with the opportunity to share some thoughts on a very timely issue, the status of women in a climate-challenged era. My insights will focus on policies implemented during environmental change. I will also highlight the significance of women's leadership as a viable solution, even under such a conflict situation. At first, it might appear that conflict change is an issue that affects women, men, and children. And while this is true, the reality is showing us that climate change impacts differently based on roles and responsibilities. Recognizing this distinction, the United Nations Commission on Women's Status has called on countries to provide effective programs and policies to reduce the effects of environmental risks and natural disasters on women's lives. With respect to Iran, the country is among the top 10 polluting countries in the world in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and it annually emits more than 600 million tons of greenhouse gases into the Earth's atmosphere. The trend in temperature rise in Iran is also above the global average. Severe air pollution, partly due to the burning of mazout, 13 million liters of which is delivered daily to Iranian power plants, releases sulfur particles, which are especially harmful to pregnant women. Other pressing issues in Iran include oil pollution, nuclear power plant emissions, drying up of lakes, wetlands, rivers, shortage of water, deforestation, loss of dams, and their consequent flooding, all exacerbate climate change. But more unfortunately, they reflect a refusal on the part of the Iranian government to alter harmful policies which create harmful conditions for Iranians as well as the international community. These policies embraced by the Iranian government directly place the burdens and harms of climate change and natural disasters on women. For example, women and young girls, especially in rural areas, are forced to collect, carry, and drink water contaminated by pollution and disease as they perform responsibilities such as cooking and cleaning and tending to hygiene practices. Dehydration, sickness, social trauma, and death disproportionately affect women. And indeed, as droughts and global warming intensify and as wetlands disappear and groundwater levels decline, women are subjected to more exploitation and violence, such as honor killings and female genocide. Women who are driven to suburbs of cities because of floods, earthquakes, or by migration due to climate change are left in a series of conflicts so that they are practically unable to reach their full potential in society. They are simply too busy trying to survive through basic human needs. Instead of creating infrastructure and support systems that alter these conditions, policies regarding water, for example, are directed toward dam construction throughout the country to collect water for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps for their financial and military goals. The Iranian government's policies are also directed toward the expansion of deep wells and emptying groundwater aquifers for military and financial gains. Another example is of policies which are directed toward transferring water through large canals to remote areas, including to Iraq, for military and financial purposes of organizations which are affiliated with the IRGC, the International Revolutionary Guard Corps. Iran needs more than ever a system that elevates women and young girls, not one which literally buries them within the tragedies of climate change. It appears that while women are the prime victims of climate change, the government and its policies are actually the main culprit. A complete and radical shift is needed now more than ever, one which will ultimately underpin its priorities and policies for human rights of women. President-elect Maryam Rajavi is a leading and progressive figure who has embodied a plan rooted in equality, human rights, and freedom. Her leadership and strong vision for the future is further demonstrated in her blueprint on how gender equality will be achieved in a future Iran. In a future Iran, women will have economic equality as well as equality in the family sphere. Violence against women will be criminalized and sexual exploitation will be banned. The repeal of the mullah's Sharia law would remove many sexist laws that the current government has been using, including stoning as punishment and the acceptance of crimes against women. In a future Iran, women will have fundamental freedoms and rights. Any type of discrimination against them will be banned, and they will have legal equality, enjoy freedoms, and have social benefits. In a future Iran, women will have equal political participation. This means that women will equally participate in political leadership. Such a system is already in place in the National Council of Resistance in Iran, the parliament in exile, which Mrs. Rajavi is leading, and it has worked well to promote equality. Mrs. Rajavi also has her 10-point plan for the future of Iran, as noted in a US House resolution sponsored by a majority of members of the US Congress in 2021. With this plan is included complete gender, religious, and ethnic equality and the protection and rehabilitation of the environment. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Solmaz, for sending us that video. I look forward to that future Iran that you're describing. And I hope that we, at that point in our homeland, can implement some of the policies and changes that Lynn was speaking of that are happening in Africa, and sort of that push forward towards more positive change for women. Next, we have Mandy Sangera. She's joining us from her base in England. Mandy's over 25 years of worldwide activism on issues of gender equality and social justice has put her among the top 200 women in the world of development. Mandy will give us her firsthand experiences with women who understand the real cost of climate issues on women in Afghanistan and Ukraine. Thank you, Mandy, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be joining the CSW panel again this year, and thank you again. A lot has changed since I last spoke last year. I spoke in March last year, and at that time of the year, I was actually evacuating the interpreters and the translators that were helping the British government, because we made a pledge to rehouse their families and bring them to the UK. Sadly, in August the 15th, a day after my birthday, so that's why I know that day. And it was quite shocking to see the Taliban come back and take over the country and take away the freedoms that women, and young women especially, had got used to. Many of the young women that I was supporting had grown up in a country where they were allowed to be educated. Just yesterday, I don't know if you saw the news, but actually the Taliban have now told everyone over the age of 11, if you're a female, you can no longer have an education. So when we talk about women empowerment and we talk about making sure that women have that seat at the table, they're empowered and everything else, they need to be educated. And if we're taking them out of school and forcing them into a marriage because their family can't afford to feed them anymore, and this is not just about the climate, but actually conflict. You know, we have seen the Taliban come in and implement their version of Sharia law. And when you read Sharia law on paper, it looks like, you know, it's promoting women's equality, women have rights. But sadly, the Taliban does not represent, you know, Islam in any way, in form or shape, and it's kind of implementing its own warped version of the faith. And sadly, it's ordinary citizens that are suffering. Women have resorted to start selling their kidneys for $1,000 US. Families are selling their children less than $20 US. We cannot turn a blind eye to this. We need to get the economy moving. We need to get society moving. So since August until even now, I've been evacuated, and to date, I've evacuated 397 individuals from Afghanistan with my support of team and friends that have come around the world, to activists and campaigners who supported me to get people out. And it's been very sad. And then more recently, I've been involved with trying to support Ukrainians to get out. And we've seen that men have been left behind to fight, and women are the ones who are facing the real price in this war in Ukraine right now. Just yesterday, I heard from a woman who was told that she, has been sexually assaulted by the Russian soldiers, because actually it's not just about the weapons that are coming at people now. Sadly, rape is a weapon in war. And we have seen this many, many times, whether it's in Bosnia, whether it's been in Iraq, whether it's been in Afghanistan previously. But, we need to call it out for what it is. So what I'm pushing for is that we try and get women jobs back in Afghanistan, that we resettle the Ukrainian women. The UK has opened a scheme where we are rehousing people and matching people to the Ukrainians. We had a plane arrive last night with beautiful young children who are orphans though, and we're trying to match them up. We've got to do lots of checks with people to see that they are a good match, and there's all these safeguarding and police checks are being carried out. But I just want to talk about climate, because people don't see it sometimes linked to violence against women, but it really does have an impact, as Lynn's spoken and as all the other speakers have spoken. Whether you go in Africa and you have a drought and you have no food. We've seen the impact of COVID last year, and even at the beginning of this year, people don't have food. And we have seen people resulting to survival sex who have been exploited to buy sanitary products, and young men are buying them the products, but actually at a cost. We have seen in the global south where floods have come in, and countries in India and Pakistan or Sri Lanka have lost all the crops and they have no food. More recently, we've seen farmer protest in India where there was half of the population is in some way involved in the agriculture. And again, women are the ones that are paying the price for this. And we need to start leveling up. As we're thinking about building back better, we are seeing women losing their jobs. We're seeing women losing their livelihoods. We've seen women juggling so many different responsibilities. But those things, we will kind of get back to normal eventually. I know that because I kind of, sadly see things come back full circle. But when you're in a crisis, you can't see the wood from the trees. I remember contacting Lynn to help me with people in America to make contact with senators and governors to see if we could get people's families out to the US. And sometimes we were successful, sometimes we were not. And we have seen people now who are still stuck in refugee camps here in the United States and in Germany and other countries around the world who are experiencing sexual harassment and violence on a regular basis. And we need to address these issues. We also need to talk about, Iran next door to Afghanistan, which is its neighbor. And a lot of people have immigrated over there for safety. And actually, people think it's safe, but actually those women that have fled there because of the fear from the Taliban have ended up in a situation worse, if not, just as dangerous. And, women are being forced into prostitution there. And people don't realize that, in Iran, that it is a hot, prostitution is so high and the numbers are so, just unbelievably high. And we have to look at this now. The vulnerable who are fleeing because of conflict, whether because of climate or for whatever reason, people are claiming refugee status in neighboring countries. 80 million people are displaced. Most of them, over 50 million of them, are in neighboring countries. But we have seen that after a couple of weeks or a couple of months when people have been there, they run out of money, they run out of resources, they can't work in these countries. And they're being exploited. They're having, their limbs being sold and stuff like that. And we cannot turn a blind eye to this. And we need to call it out for what it is, because it is abuse. I was in the MENA region recently, And I went into a beauty salon to get my eyebrows threaded. And I was a bit taken aback because actually what happened was the women didn't know that I spoke this language, and the ladies that were doing the threading ended up you know, trying to do a deal, and they were like saying, oh, we're going to haggle her down to 150 dirhams. We're not going to give her 200 dirhams. And I thought, okay. So I'm just eavesdropping as I would, because I'm just, you know, me. And this beautiful young Asian girl came in, no more than 22, 23. And all I could see was that she was the same age as my nieces. And she had the most beautiful big black hair that I've ever seen. And she'd come to this beautician to actually sell her hair. So me being me, sort of called her and said, oh, can you show me where the metro was? The metro was literally outside. I mean, she must have thought I was on crack or something, but and I took her outside. I spoke to her in her own language. She didn't know that I knew the language. And I said, what are you doing? And I then said to her, and she said, look, I was here, I had a job, but because of the pandemic, I lost my job. I can't afford to feed myself. I then told her that I could support her to leave the country to go back home, but she refused to go. I gave her a couple of hundred dirhams, what she was going to pay for her hair, but I'm sure that she's gone back today and probably sold it. But I did have this conversation with her. I said, today you're selling your hair. What are you going to sell tomorrow? Because when you have nothing else, then what are you going to do? And, you know, so when people sometimes are refugees, they become so vulnerable, or whether people have gone over into a different country to work, but their circumstances have changed and they've lost their livelihoods. There are people who are opportunists that will exploit people. And we have seen this now on a regular basis, and we need to call things out. Just last week, Nazreen has come back to the UK after serving 6 years in an Iranian prison as a dual citizen. And it's great to see her here. At the beginning of the year, her husband had made a pledge to be on hunger strike, and he passed the baton. And I was one of those people who ended up doing a 24-hour hunger strike to keep the hunger strike going for him. And actually, I was overwhelmed by the amount of women around the world that came forward to understand and support the Iranian women. And that actually we had 1,173 women sign up to the Filia campaign to pass on the baton to support Richard with his fight for Nazreen. But we are so pleased that she is home. But one thing she has said, there are so many people who are not known, who are prisoners, who are dual citizens from another country, and we need to look at this and call it out for what it is. So I think, you know, as we kind of come and wrap up, I think that we need to really sort of think about paying it forward and look at supporting people. So if we have got Afghans or Ukrainians in your city, in your country, please look at mentoring. If you have a job that you can give these people, please do that. And it's about like upskilling people. Some of these women have got degrees, but actually their degrees may be not transferable, but they may need to do another course for a little while, or they need that little bit more work experience that is, you know, UK focused or American, because sometimes I could come over with my qualifications into the United States and they may not be quite what the American, you know, education system recognizes. So this is where we're at. And then what we've also seen is that a lot of people that have left Afghanistan last year and the people that are leaving Ukraine today, they're leaving with just, you know, the bare minimum. They're not taking their qualifications. They're not taking everything with them. They're just taking enough to get out of the country to survive. And as they're going along, they're selling things, they're losing things. So I think that we all have a responsibility to try and support and empower women in conflict if we can. It's really important that we become a sponsor or a mentor, that we educate the next generation, and that we also lobby and call out governments. You know, we have a responsibility to call out our senators and our government ministers around the world. And I think, you know, one of the things that I have realized is that all the women that did the campaign and took over from Richard, that put a lot of pressure on the UK government to intervene in the Nazreen, because we were putting it out in the media every single day. But she was a lucky one. But we know that there are millions that are not so lucky around the world, who are imprisoned around the world and lost all their human rights. So we have a responsibility. If you see something, to do something, don't just turn a blind eye to it. As we build back from the pandemic and we build back from conflict, and we try and, we're all struggling financially and lots of things are happening, but it is about like supporting each other and really helping everybody. And also we had COP26 in the UK last year, and it was interesting to see because there was countries in the Pacific who have not polluted in any way, shape or form, but actually are the ones paying the price. So I think it is about thinking about our carbon footprint. It's also thinking about the impact that we are doing. And if everyone did their little bit, it would have an impact in a global impact as well. So I just wanted to end there and just say, look, we all have a responsibility to do something. If we all did our little bit, I promise you, it's a step in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Mandy. The conditions you describe are unthinkable and unacceptable. We must all stand against these wars on the innocent and protect the refugees and the women who are being abused and exploited. It's not just about rights, it's about responsibilities.
Yeah, we have seen this in the Ukraine. Sadly, human trafficking was always a big issue previously before the whole crisis. And we have seen women now going missing. We've seen children being taken and, through this pandemic. And we have a responsibility to really, really lobby, because actually, women are going to be ending up being forced into the sex industry or forced labor market. And we need to, make sure that we do our little bit to try and keep everybody safe.
Absolutely. Our thoughts and prayers are with the women in Afghanistan, Ukraine, and all the women in the world whose lives and bodies are under siege right now. Our next speaker is Dr. Amina Ali. Dr. Amina Ali is a decorated U.S. Army Gulf War veteran and the founder and executive director of the Federation of International Gender and Human Rights, LLC. This social impact organization, founded in New York as a sovereign consulate, has the mission to make specific and intentional protocol, protections, and provisions for gender and human rights, inclusively affordable and attainable as civil and social rights for all marginalized, indigent, and underserved communities of domestic and foreign parentage. Dr. Ali today will be speaking about the ripple effect of climate change on human rights, a social construct. Thank you, Dr. Ali, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Zara. To the WFF board, embassy ambassadors, consul generals, high commissioners, diplomats, dignitaries, honored guests, supporters, and local attendees, I welcome you to experience with me being a woman of the African diaspora, an indigenous native to the United States, but of rooted blood in the Republic of the Gambia. I speak for the women of indigenous diaspora who were brought here to the land known as the United States, but have roots and are rooted in the betterment and the uplifting of the women of our lands. I speak today on the ripple effect of climate change on human rights as a social construct. And this reading is going to be directed specifically to sovereign, stateless, landless, refugee women, indigenous women, and women of internal displacement. This is intentional, as this will claim the plight and the reality of what these women deal with on a day-to-day basis in IDP camps, in refugee asylums, and those lands that have been stricken with bias, prejudice, and discrimination against these women, and the roles that they have in rebuilding their lives. This work addresses the relationship between human rights and climate change. It begins with the impacts of global warming on human rights, like the right to life and the right to physical and mental health, and then turns into the socio-political and economic deficits that come from such actions. This follows the limits and possibilities of using human rights to address a problem as a strategic plan and to alter the path of destruction. using the central argument that human rights enjoy a relatively high level of dignity. Finding solutions, however, seem to atrophy under matters of politics and economics. This study was to show the imbalance between our private cultures of behaviors and the public construct of their effects on climate change in underdeveloped, undeveloped, and newly developed lands. More importantly, why preventive advocacy and its preemptive representation may not be aligned with the social construct of dignity and the behaviors affecting climate change in our communities. Climate change impacts and measures taken to mitigate, or adapt to these impacts, referred to as response measures, are already affecting both individuals and communities. Particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change are individuals and peoples whose way of life is tied to nature. Coastal and low-lying island states that lack the economic resource to adapt to severe changes are affected the most. At the extreme, climate impacts and response measures threaten to destroy many cultures of people around the world. They render their lands uninhabitable and deprive them of their means of subsistence. Women and children are particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change in the poorest regions of the world. Women often bear the primary responsibility for gathering the essentials of food, water, and fuel supplies for their families, thus cannot afford or access these measures in the most extreme or crisis times. Droughts caused by climate change make their work extremely hard. Wells run dry, crop productions decline, and fuel wood has to be collected from further distances. Similarly, shortages of food and water will increase malnutrition among children and diminish their very chances to receive and even attain the most basic of school education. Adaptation and mitigation actions to address these impacts can affect perhaps profoundly the livelihoods, lifestyles, cultures, traditions, and ancestry of indigenous people and local communities. Children are also more vulnerable in natural disasters as they lack the physical virility and more often are orphaned or separated from their families. Indigenous people are also particularly vulnerable to climate change since their way of life is often tied to natural environments, and consequently, those environmental changes impact their ability to access water, food, shelter, and the natural construct of their daily life. As economics go, developed and industrialized countries have had an obligation to assist lower income countries in funding mitigation and adaptive strategies necessary to reduce emission and protect vulnerable populations. However, lower income countries acting alone are not in a financial position to fully protect their populations from climate impacts. Finance is therefore critical to assist these countries in fighting climate change and protecting the human rights of their people. The development and application of social protections and monetary safeguards are also necessary to prevent social and economic harm, to maximize precipitation and participation in transparency, accountability, equity, and the rights that are protected for them. In conclusion, human rights provide an elevated language of ethics and dignity capable of transcending ordinary law and politics, but it is not simple to use them in this international level of system. Likewise, their power at this domestic level is contingent upon the degree to which states respect them. Their entitlement, their privilege, and their power at the domestic level is contingent upon the degree to which the states respect them. The willingness of courts to admit cases, and above all, on the degree to which they are incorporated in constitutions or legislation, matter. Human rights inevitably and necessarily promote the relationship between human beings and nature that facilitate evident climate change. But in the absence of geo-placements of fixes, which can also be ethically problematic, the failure of politics is likely that victims of climate change will turn increasingly to the law in general and human rights in particular to search for remedies and dispensated compensation. Nevertheless, we should expect attempts to use existing rights and the advent to formulate new ones, and the increase of demands for climate justice, especially for those least responsible for it, invariably the poor and weak and vulnerable, to be the very voice of this argument for centuries to come. Closing this gap will not be easy, but it is possible. And the intention, the direct voice of the people that are closest to the problem should be heard in the solution that is gathered to remedy this as healed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ali, for that perspective. Indigenous populations and the most vulnerable are so often intentionally overlooked or dismissed in policy and supposed intervention. The so-called systems are just not inclusive, and that's what it is. Thank you for bringing this perspective and their voice to this conversation today. We appreciate it. Next, we are joined by Mitra Samani. Mitra is the Women Freedom Forum California Director and Congressional Liaison. As a teenager, Mitra was arrested for supporting women's rights in Iran and held for 4 years in an Iranian prison under horrific conditions. Her experiences are chilling. She now lives in the United States and is a survivor turned activist in support of worldwide women's and human rights. Today, Mitra will be discussing Iranian women challenging anti-environmental policies. Thank you so much, Mitra, for being here today.
Thank you, Sarah. Distinguished panelists, respected organizers at Women Freedom Forum, dear friends. As we mark the 2022 CSW parallel event, we are once again reminded of the inadequacy of resources amongst the most vulnerable people. I'm going to speak about my home country, Iran, and its rich natural resources being plundered by the very system that is supposed to protect it. The anti-environmental policies and mismanagement of Iran's natural resources have resulted in worsening of climate change, overwhelming Iranian women and children in poverty, unemployment, disease, and various other issues. Climate change in Iran has already begun, especially if you are poor, woman, child, elderly, and disabled. Climate crisis fuels female poverty, unemployment, and all forms of discrimination and violence against women. Clearly, poverty is at odds with economic and environmental development. Hence, reducing poverty becomes essential for economic development, and in Iran, the face of poverty is feminine. The Iranian government is not only not in line with any of goals of the 17 UN SDGs, it is exactly the opposite of empowering women. Such misogynist nature, which institutionalized in-laws, excludes most Iranian females from social and economic opportunities. In the 2021 government budget, less than 0.2% was allocated to environmental affairs, and this year, in 2022, is less than 2% of the budget. Bear in mind that food prices have risen by more than 60% in recent months, on top of high inflation in the previous 3 years, while the government is unable to sufficiently boost wages. More than 50% of Iranian teachers are women, and most are the heads of households. In 2021 alone, teachers staged 600 protests, sit-ins, and demonstrations for not being paid in months and other grievances. Currently, 99% of Iran's teachers live below the poverty line. According to Article 125 of the Civil Service Law, salaries of government employees, including teachers, must increase each year based on the inflation rate. Government employees' salaries were up by 25, 15, and 10% respectively over the past 3 years. As inflation has risen by several 100%, the average salaries of retired teachers are 3 times below the poverty line. More than 80% of nurses in Iran are women. Of the approximate 145,000 nurses, more than 136,000 were infected with the COVID-19, and unfortunately leaving 140 of them dead. The current global standard is 4 nurses per bed, but in Iran, often a single nurse cares for 25 patients. Nurses' monthly salary is $195. Sometimes they are required to work as many as 20 hours in a single shift. Nurses are among those across society who are protesting low income and mistreatment by the system. Many nurses and hospital staff go for long periods of time without receiving their salaries. Many female nurses have canceled their contracts due to excessive pressure, separation from children and family, and the resulting stress. Low wages and long working hours are among the factors that cause nurses to immigrate. Nurses' migration has increased from 200% to 300% compared to past years. As a policy, the government does not pay the slightest attention to the effects and consequences of climate change on Iranian women, especially on female-headed households, stay-at-home spouses, and agricultural and rural women. Women who are driven to suburbs of cities because of floods, earthquakes, or by migration due to climate change are left in a series of calamities so that they are practically unable to rise and be effective in society. Concluding its 61st session, the UN Commission on the Status of Women expressed concern over the continuing feminization of poverty and stressed that the eradication of poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty, is an integral part of sustainable development. The Commission acknowledged the interaction between achieving gender equality and empowering all women, and eradicating poverty, and the need to ensure an acceptable standard of living for women and girls throughout their lives, including through social protection systems. In contrast to such a goal, the spread of poverty and the feminization of poverty in Iran has had far-reaching consequences in society. Despite the above, Iranian women have not given up on their basic human rights, food, shelter, and means of a decent living for themselves and their families. By all evidence of their sacrifices, they are setting an example of resilience, intelligence capabilities, and hope for us all. Women's Freedom Forum, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mitra. Better understanding the underlying economic disparities that exist for women in Iran is so telling of the overall conditions of our country. Poverty is truly the greatest weapon in our world that we have. And women are truly the fabric and pulse of every society. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us today. And finally, we have Dr. Antonia Felix. Antonia is an instructor in the School of Education at Minnesota State University, Mankato, and an education and racial equity consultant. She is the New York Times bestselling author of 24 books, including biographies of women leaders such as Senator Elizabeth Warren and Supreme Court Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sonia Sotomayor. Thank you so much, Antonia, for being with us here today. She will end today's program with an uplifting talk on bringing women to the table for environmental solutions, a story from Egypt.
Thank you so much. And thank you all of our viewers from all over the world who are staying for our entire presentation today. It means a lot to know that you are so passionate about these issues. It's so great to have you here, to have this opportunity to speak. As previous speakers have talked about, the MENA region in particular is suffering drastic environmental disasters from climate change. As a matter of fact, this region is warming at twice the global average, making it one of the most climate change vulnerable areas of the planet. And it is the most water stressed region in the world. So drought, as other speakers have talked about, sea level rising, and other extreme events that lead to water scarcity and a low food supply, of course, bring migration and social unrest as well. And in some countries in this area, social unrest may exacerbate the political instability that already exists. So slowing climate change takes long-term strategies as well as immediate actions like making laws to lower CO2 emissions. And I would like to share the story of one long-term investment that is taking place in Egypt. For the past decade, Egypt's education ministry has been creating new opportunities for its girls and boys to become scientists and engineers equipped with the knowledge and skills and creativity to solve the country's grand challenges, which include, of course, climate change and their clean water shortages. Egypt's critical need for clean water solutions is partly caused by rising Mediterranean sea levels, which are eroding riverbanks along the Nile Delta, where half of Egypt's crops are grown, and also mixing seawater with the Nile water used for irrigation. To highlight how a public education policy can address climate change challenges, let's take a second now and zoom out from that drying delta region way out beyond the space station, beyond Mars even, to the asteroid belt. Just stay with me here. Floating among those millions of little rocks is one called Mustafa 31910, named after an Egyptian girl, Yasmin Mustafa. NASA awarded Yasmin that honor after she won first prize in the Earth and Environmental Sciences category at the 2015 Intel International Science and Engineering Fair. That fair is a big deal. For her winning project, 17-year-old Yasmin had invented a method of burning rice straw as a biofuel to purify water and produce electricity. Her win followed on the heels of 3 other Egyptian girls who had made their mark as grand award winners at the Intel competition the year before, placing 3rd in the environmental management category with their vacuum evaporation device for water purification. In these competitions, the girls proved themselves among 1,600 of the best and brightest students in the world. All 4 girls were students at Egypt's Mahdi STEM school, one of the 2 new high schools focusing on science, technology, engineering, and math that were launched in 2011. Since then, Egypt has launched 19 more STEM high schools as the cornerstone of their education overhaul launched during the Arab Spring. This was a revolution inside a revolution. The country's new policy about how to educate their best and brightest, regardless of income, because these are public schools, which are free, just as Egypt's colleges are free, This new policy can be seen as one of the most unique ways the MENA region is addressing its climate crises. When Egypt's Ministry of Education teamed up with 4 US organizations to revamp their schools, they received a USAID grant to develop new high schools from scratch. Their process began with answering the question, what do you want your country to look like in 5 years, in 10 years? This inspired them to define their country's grand challenges and design their high schools as experiential learning centers for solving them. No Egyptian schools had ever been based on a project-based learning style, but had instead, like so many other school systems around the world, taught students to memorize facts to prepare for high-stakes national exams that would determine who went to college and where. The change since these schools have launched is extraordinary. As one scholar involved in developing the schools put it, Egypt went from having little to no presence in international STEM competitions to being an outsized competitor and contributor of innovative ideas following the development of the STEM high schools. The girls' winning projects I highlighted show how carefully the STEM high schools apply their mission of addressing these challenges. And by the way, how the girls have been outdoing the boys. Each semester, students work on a capstone project in small teams to formulate solutions and build projects in the lab. Each subject in the high school curriculum, not just the science subjects, each plays a role in fostering skills for problem solving in the real world. Now, why do we need women to be involved in science if that has, well, of course, it's obvious. It's always been much more of a man's world, engineering and science as a profession. And Egypt has now recognized that the diversity that's necessary in any kind of an organization is especially important in coming up with these innovative ideas for solving their problems. And before the creation of these STEM high schools, Egyptian girls did not have a lot of incentive to apply for college to study science or engineering, primarily because of the lack of job opportunities they would face after they graduated. Unemployment is a major obstacle for Egypt's young adults. 1/4 of the population is aged 18 to 29, and 90% of the unemployed are under age 30. In the context of that rather grim outlook, part of the draw of the STEM schools was the project and team-based structure that would prepare girls to strike out on their own as entrepreneurs. To survive climate change, every nation needs to tap into its most creative minds to think out of the box. Diversity is essential for creative problem solving, as I mentioned, and Egypt's educational leaders recognized that by giving equal opportunity to girls, their STEM schools would more effectively move their society forward. This reminds me of what Dr. Ali was talking about how our systems need to start integrating the respect for every member of society, and also for this to have a focus on inclusion, to have a priority on inclusion. Our systems, of course, need to be embracing this everywhere around the world. Specifically about these fields, research tells us that women are attracted to careers in which they can directly contribute to the well-being of others. And more, engineering is being seen as one of these helping professions. According to James Middleton, a professor of engineering at Arizona State, who also specializes in developing STEM education, women contribute new ideas and solutions because they bring a more purpose-driven perspective, coming to engineering with a focus on what kind of impact they can make on society. His women students are more human-centered, as he put it, in a field that has been long dominated by a good old boys network, which may be because women are more socialized than men to be that way. Having women in our engineering school, he said, makes better engineering, solves problems better, and makes the world a better place because women allow us to work differently. Gender and equity was mandatory in Egypt's new STEM schools. The Minister of Education wanted it, the USAID grant required it, and the teacher hiring process demanded it. The teachers we hired were interviewed about this, said Joseph Merlino, president of the 21st Century Partnership for STEM Education, because we would not tolerate anyone with a no female bias. There's some systemic change for you. In the wider scope of women's rights to be part of decision-making, Egypt's STEM schools are fulfilling the democratic ethic that those who bear the consequences of a decision should have a proportionate share in making it. As citizens, these girls are now being given the opportunities they deserve to pursue professional careers that will make them valuable experts on policy matters about climate change and other environmental challenges. The bright and motivated girls in Egypt's STEM schools are dedicated to making a positive impact on their country and the world by focusing their gifts, knowledge, and skills on our most pressing challenges. Some of the girls are now in colleges and universities around the world or employed in the science, engineering, or tech industries. As one final thought, in a video the Mahdi STEM School prepared, the girls offered a poetic declaration of their passion for solving the world's environmental crises. They said, "You look at sand and you see dust. We look at sand and we see electricity. You look at water and you see a drink. We look at water and we see a fuel cell. You look at garbage and you see dirt. We look at garbage and we see biogas. You look at STEM and you see a school. We look at STEM and we see a dream." So bravo to those girls, and bravo to Egypt's new administration that is putting a focus on this kind of education for all of their children. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Felix. So inspiring to hear about how young girls have brought hope, real change, and real impact to the enormous issue of climate change. Anytime young women are given the chance to rise, and they teach us all something. We must show and give our young girls an equal platform to change this world. I know I try to do that every day with my daughter. I'd like to thank all of our speakers today for bringing their incredible experiences and perspectives to this urgent conversation. Women Freedom Forum is a volunteer-based organization. The women here today and everyone who supports this organization does so because of a deep belief in women's rights, and we believe that open and independent dialogue and sharing is a critical component in the advancement of our mission to raise public awareness on women's issues, including human rights, empowerment, economic development, and gender equality. We ask that you all share the perspectives and stories that were shared today that resonate with you with others. These issues should not be kept in the shadows and out of the mainstream conversations. Climate change disproportionately impacts women, and it also is a human issue that impacts every single one of us. We thank all of you for being here and opening your minds and hearts to these perspectives. Thank you.
Sorry about this, guys. I've ended up had to jump